Hello and welcome to the fifth video lecture for chapter 14. This time we're going to talk about men's dress, but this time we're going to cover all of the looks that we've covered for women. So we're going to start with the year 1870 and go all the way to the turn of the century to 1900, because men's clothing aren't going to change that drastically. There's not that many differences in styles. What we're going to see is an increase in the type of choices that men will have, but pretty much they're going to be the basic style of suit options with relatively somber colors. And there's not that much of a difference between the bustle look and the gay 90s, unless you happen to be a tailor and you're really having to study exact measurements and how the lapels worked and how long the skirts were and all that kind of stuff. For our purposes, I basically want you to be able to recognize these second half, third quarter, let's say, of the Victorian period and what menswear looks like. So we're going to look at this all at once and note specific differences and note things that are new. So let's start underneath. The undergarments that men wear are similar to what we've seen before. We're going to see men wearing drawers as underpants, but they button or have a drawstring to close them. They have something called an undervest, which we would call an undershirt. But these buttoned up the front and had long sleeves. They're not like a t-shirt or a tank t-shirt or a wife beater that we're familiar with. It's more like an undershirt for real that had buttons up the front. And they also had the thing that, like the women have, a combination top and bottom, or these actually look like long johns or union suits. There's different discussion about where the term union suit came from. One explanation is that it's the union of the top, the undervest, and the drawers put into one. Here's an example of what the drawers look like, and that some of these actually were all the way down to the ankle, like pants were, and they could be wool if it was cold weather. You can see in the drawing on the right how complete they really could be, if they could be more like mid-calf length or all the way to the bottom of the foot. So these aren't like underpants that we think of today. And here's a drawing of a union suit, and you guys are probably all familiar with long johns. And that's pretty much what this looks like. We've got a top and a bottom joined together, and you'd step into it and button it up the front. So, what do they wear for the daytime? We'll talk about day wear, and we'll talk about evening wear, and then we'll also talk about sports wear. So we have several different types of daytime wear coats, and we've seen most of these already. The frock coat, the longish one that had skirts, is going to be fashionable, the most fashionable daytime coat until the 1890s, where it will still be seen, but will be replaced in popularity by something referred to as a morning coat that is around in the 1870s and 80s, but will be very popular in the late 1890s and is going to become the most popular type of coat to wear for dressier daytime wear. It starts out at being more of a fancy, event garment, but then will turn into a businessman's type, an upper class businessman's type garment. Now, the word morning has duplicate meanings. Some people say that the name morning coat comes from the habit of many upper class men of getting up very early in the morning and doing their riding on their horse for exercise or what have you early in the morning, and then wearing a garment when they did that was cut away in the front. And when this style of garment became more popular to wear during the day, since it looked like this garment worn for morning riding, they started calling it a morning coat. Other people say that it's called a morning coat because this was the garment that was more appropriate for upper class men and businessmen to wear in the earlier part of the day. And after a certain point of the day, some people said it was noon, some people said it was after 2 o'clock, the correct garment might not be this coat. Many men would change to a frock coat. Now, that's an interesting area of debate, and I would love to hear any of you come up with some research on what you find about not only the origin of the name of this coat, but when it was exactly worn, because there are many different scholars that argue about this. I think a deeper look into tailoring and men's etiquette might lead us to some differences of opinion, even from that. But anyway, it's a different style than the frock coat. And then there's something that's going to become even more popular during this 30 years, and that is referred to as the lounge coat, or other people call it a sack coat or a sack jacket. And that could be a single or double-breasted, shorter length coat, and I think we saw this start to come in at the end of the crinoline period. It's become even more popular during this 30 years, and is not just for lower class gentlemen, but also will become stylish for more informal occasions for upper class gentlemen as well. And then there's something called a Norfolk jacket, which is very sporty, very much a sporty kind of country thing that had a belt, a fabric belt with it. And sometimes the belt could go all the way around the body, and sometimes it was just half of the body. But it was usually worn for sports wear, and it came in a tweed or a plaid or whatever. Let's look at some examples of all of these. Here is a sketch from a fashion magazine from 1886 that shows several of the varieties of coats we're going to talk about. Everything from the formal evening wear coat on the left through frock coat and sack coats, morning coats, what have you. Let's look more specifically. Here is a line drawing of a frock coat from the 1880s, and you can see this has got a waistline seam, whitish lapels, and is long. The characteristic of the frock coat is that it comes down to about the knees. Now, it changes length in different time periods, but it's always got full skirts all the way around, including the front in particular, and is long. And you can see the lovely photograph on the right of a gentleman in a frock coat with a matching vest and pants. And on his, you can see that the lapels are quite wide. This is most likely during the 1870s or 80s. And there is a little bit of black, it looks like black on black trim or some kind of binding on the edge of his lapels that give a little bit of interest. And then here's two more photographs from the time period. I just love being able to use real vintage photographs to show you these things. Two different frock coats on two different gentlemen. Different kind of wearing of the frock coat. The guy on the left has it all buttoned up and we don't see his vest. The gentleman on the right has it open and we do see his vest and trousers. This is getting a little ahead here, but I'd also like you to take a look at the trousers. The guy on the left has very thin striped trousers on, and the man on the right has black ones that look like they could pretty much match the suit, but maybe even be a little bit darker. I want you to look at the hem length on these. The gentleman on the left, you can see his hem where it's sewn on the inside, and the foot that he has bent and the toe touching the ground. The gentleman on the right has an example of what I was mentioning in class, where the front of the pants hem might be shorter than the back of the pants hem. Can you see how it breaks over the shoe in the front, and it's cut long? They're cut long enough that you have a little bit of a stack or a little bit of a wrinkle, but in the back they go all the way down to the back of the heel. So that's jumping ahead for a second, but I like these examples, so I wanted to be able to point that out. The other coat, the newish, more important thing that's going to be really popular is called the morning coat. And if you look, there's a line drawing in the middle there, but there's also two illustrations from from fashion magazines of what this thing could really look like. And if you look at the man on the left, you can see that it is cut away from the body. Now his are more squared along the bottom of his of the coat. If you look at the little drawing in the middle of the man that has a derby hat on, you can see that his are curved more than square, but it's longish. It's almost the same length as a frock coat would be. But if you can imagine taking scissors and cutting from where the buttons close the coat and curving it around or cutting some front of it off, that's pretty much what we're talking about here. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people refer to the morning coat as a cutaway coat. So there are different ways to do that, whether it's squared off or curved off or really cut back or just slightly cut back. That's what I'm talking about, is this kind of, it's got length to it, but it's almost as if you took a frock coat length and cut away in the front. And this is referred to as a morning coat. Here is a portrait of a man and his wife, and you can see this gentleman has a morning coat on as well. And you'll also notice in these photographs different ways that these gentlemen buttoned their coats. Sometimes the top button would be buttoned, sometimes in the middle, sometimes the whole thing. But you can see that this one has been cut away. And two more gents. One in another photograph, and he's got a delightful mustache and kind of funny hairstyle, but that has been cut away and it's rather long. And then on the right, an even more severe and more formal looking cutaway or morning coat on the right. And then here's a hodgepodge. We've got a little bit of frock coats and a couple morning coats on this, and I'd like you to be able to definitely identify the difference between a morning coat and a frock coat. And I think you should be able to tell from these photographs which are which. I like the one of the guy with his hands in his pockets wearing a fully buttoned frock coat. And you can see also that his length on his frock coat is much shorter than some of the other ones. So there is a difference in length of the skirts in different time periods, what was fashionable and what wasn't. But the idea remains the same. Okay, so the sack suit or lounge suit that becomes really popular during this time period also had some variation in the shape. The idea primarily, though, is that it's short. And it starts out pretty square. It's shorter. It comes like right over the posterior, or also oftentimes are as long as the man's wrist or a little longer towards the fingers, but not as long as the knee or above the knee. And you can see the ones in the larger photograph are gentlemen in the 1870s wearing sack suits or lounge suit coats, and the gentleman with the very fabulous boater straw hat and the fun mustache, his sack jacket is from the 1890s, and you can see that the tailoring of these gets refined a little bit, but these are pretty much known as being looser, not as form-fitting to the body, a little more comfortable, allowing more wear, and are considered, for the upper class anyway, more of an informal garment. But this will become the suit of the middle and lower classes and will evolve into what we know today as a business suit. Here are some more, and the two pictures on the far left and far right are pictures of definitely lower level economic status gentlemen, and you can see how the pockets on the guy on the left are a little bit misshapen. It's very baggy looking. The guy on the right look like his doesn't even totally fit him. It looks like it's too tight and too short. So real people in real life traded clothes, passed them down, got fatter, got skinnier, grew up, whatever. And a lot of times the more inexpensive garments weren't very well made. I mean, it's just like today. They may not have been tailored as nicely, and if they were being made to fit a particular size range and be available through mail order, then of course they wouldn't fit perfectly on the body. So it's always fun to look at pictures of people wearing these clothes, not just the fashion illustrations like the two dapper men in the middle with the top hats, with, lovely, well-fitting sack jackets and then really fun pants. And here's some more illustrations. Again, the photographs show what these things really look like on people, and I would venture to guess that the older gentleman with the goatee on the right is probably uh, wealthier than the other guy, and his fits a little bit better. But you can get the idea. It's cut away oftentimes, as these guys are, but not like the morning coat. It's shorter. And here's some more illustrations of what I'm talking about. And oftentimes they would not be matching, all pieces matching. That's referred to as a ditto suit or a three-piece suit. Oftentimes the sack jacket would be of one fabric, the vest could be something else, and the pants could be more fun. And here are two examples of remaining sack suits from the 1890s for you to see. And both of these are ditto suits or three-piece suits. The one on the left is more of a window pane plaid, and the one on the right is more of a gray, really small plaid or tweed. And also notice on these, when you look at men's suits, always notice how many buttons they have and how high up the body they button. The higher they button, the smaller the lapels usually are. And also helps denote where in history these suits occur. As we go into more and more modern times, we're going to have periods, especially in the 20th century, where there's going to be only one or two buttons, and the coat will open much lower on the body. So that's a really important identifying characteristic for you to notice. How many buttons are there, and how high up the body does it go? And here's a couple more. These are from the 1890s. The one on the left, is very interesting. But look at the one on the right. This was the weirdest picture, so I had to enjoy it or include it. Do you see how this man's suit jacket is opened up? And why is he wearing it like that? I have no idea. I mean, he looks like a really dapper dude. He's got spats on and everything. But the way that this picture is taken and the way his coat is opened, I'm wondering if this is like it almost looks like it even could be a double-breasted one that's open way too far. I just thought that was so bizarre. And look at that pinstripe. I mean, that's like killer pinstripe. Okay, Norfolk jacket. This is the one that has a fabric belt attached to it, whether it's a full belt or just partial. And in the drawing here, you can see that it's definitely a sewn-on belt, and there's just like a little button thing. So you'd put the thing on, button it down the front, and then button the fabric belt. Here is a drawing of two gentlemen wearing Norfolk jackets, and it looks like the belt on the guy on the left is a real fabric belt that is being worn on top of the jacket. So sometimes they were sewn on, sometimes they were worn with, but belt is the thing. The trousers. Okay, they're pretty much cut straight and narrow. Evening trousers might even be a little slimmer than daytime trousers. And I've already talked to you a little bit about the way the hems were done. So we've got, evening trousers, men's trousers could be in different colors, plaids, stripes, checks sometimes. Sometimes you get a little bit of action in the pants, but there's also a new thing that we've seen something similar to before, referred to as knickerbockers or knickers, and these were short pants. They were to the knee, and they were worn for sports and physical activities, golf, hiking, tennis, whatever. And they're usually worn with high knee length socks and or high boots up to the knee where the pants would end, or gaiters. You remember those fasten on with buttons and could be made out of fabric. So here's some examples of different kinds of trousers. We've already seen a few that were interesting. But the guy in the middle, this is more like 1870s. He's definitely got major striped trousers on. The guy on the right, he has a very small stripe. And then the gentleman on the left, they're just plain ones, and they match his suit. But here is some knickers, and these aren't very balloony ones. These are late 1880s, but this is a golf outfit, and you can see he's got tall knee socks up, and then he's got like spats on top of shoes that we can see. So that's one use of knickerbockers. Here's another one. This is the Prince of Wales, who was a big hunter, wearing a little looser ones in 1870s that go with a sack-style jacket. And then this guy has snug ones worn as part of a cycling outfit when he's riding his big old bicycle. And you can tell from this that it probably wouldn't be a good idea to have big balloony ones because they might get caught in the spokes of this kind of a bike. And you can see he has high socks and then high top shoes. And then these are some gentlemen who are wearing shooting outfits, and they have a little bit more of a blouse to them. They're wearing um, lounge jackets and knickerbockers and boots to go hunting. And again, here's another drawing of a sports ensemble where the jacket itself is pretty squared off and double-breasted, which this is a little later. This is in the late 1890s. So it does evolve a little bit, and the width of the knickers can change depending on what the activity is. But know that they're short pants. The vests or waistcoats. Most vests are going to button up high in the 70s and 80s. And we don't really see much of them in the 1890s. Excuse me, we do see a lot of them in the 1890s because we're going to see coats that are more open. A lot of times the gentlemen would not button their coats as severely as they did in the 70s and 80s, and we would then see more of the vest. So when we see more of the vest, they're going to have a little bit more interest in making the vest interesting to look at and making them out of fancier fabric. The diagram here shows some different styles of vests from these times periods, and you can tell some of them have collars, and there's an example. View B there has a shawl collar that doesn't have a notch in it. View C does have a notched collar, and View A doesn't have a collar at all. They could be single-breasted, double-breasted, have little welt pockets, or not. And here's just two illustrations or photographs from the time period that I thought had some cool vests. This very dapper gentleman on the left with a double-breasted, wide-lapelled, light-colored vest. And then the three gentlemen on the right side each have a different kind of vest with their top-hatted ensembles. The man who's seated with his hands in his pockets on the left has a velvet waistcoat. The man standing in the middle has a striped one, and the man sitting on the stool on the right has a lighter colored single-breasted one, and they all look fabulous. What do their shirts look like? Well, the shirts are stiff for one thing. They would be very nicely starched in the front because that's what shows. And then they would have removable collars. The shirt itself would have like a little banded collar, and then removable collars would be starched within an inch of their life and came in a bunch of different styles. And they are quite tall by the time we get to the 1890s. That's another way you can tell time period is what do their collars look like in these things. By the time we get into the 1880s, the idea of having removable collars and cuffs is really, really common. The idea being you could change the style of the suit or of the shirt by having a different kind of a collar buttoned onto it, and also you could replace these easily as they got soiled and worn, which they did. And there's a lot of different collar styles during this 30 years. Everything from a plain stand-up collar to ones that folded over, like a shirt collar's more familiar, beginning to look more familiar to us as a fold-over collar. But a really popular one during the time period was also a rounded edged collar, or they're sometimes referred to as Perry collars, wingtip ones for evening wear, and there's tons more. So just know that there's choices to be made in shirt collars and what kind of a style you wanted to set. And also, by the time we get in the 1890s, they're not all just white either. You could have colored shirts or stripes. So things are going to have a few more choices for gentlemen as we go through time. Here is an illustration that shows a few types of removable collars from this time period. And right in the top middle is what we refer to as a wing tip. And then other ones that look like shirt collars today. And know that in addition to that, there are also rounded collars. Now, the shirt at the bottom, there's a drawing of what a shirt would look like, and you can see there's kind of a area in the front. That's called the shirt front. This shirt happens to have cuffs attached to it, but those could also be purchased and buttoned on as well. And you see, here's an interesting little thing. Do you see the little tab at the center below the waist with a buttonhole in it? That would fasten to a button on the inside of the trousers to keep the shirt tucked in and it wouldn't pooch out. Here's a photograph from the 1890s of two gentlemen without their suit coats on, which is very unusual, which is why this is a wonderful picture, because it shows us what the shirts look like, what the collars and cuffs look like. The one guy who's seated has a vest on, but the other guy doesn't. And you can also see how the suspenders, or if you're British, the braces, were buttoned to the trousers, and also how high the waistline of the trousers comes up. I mean, that's past his waist. Those are definitely tall trousers. The other thing I like about this is because there's no vest or coat on, the guy who's standing, the younger guy, you can see how short the tails of his necktie are. I think this is a great picture. Okay, let's talk about ties for a second. Bow ties are really popular, and the shape of those changes throughout this 30 years too. And I have some examples here. They start out being pretty wide, and with the knot being pretty, wide as well. And as we go through time, they get smaller and smaller and more like the bow tie that we know today. But there were also longer neckties during this time period that would be knotted or folded over and held in place with what we would think of as like a tie pin or a stud. Now, if you look at these two photographs, the man with the top hat in the middle is a little bit earlier. He has a bow tie that looks like it's been hand tied, and it's a little bit wider and softer looking. The gentleman on the left is later in the late 1890s, and his is much smaller and not as soft looking. And then here's a couple more illustrations of bow-style ties, and there's a lot of different variety. The guy on the right, this is really early 1870s. His bow tie actually has tails that hang down really low and sloppy. And isn't that a really interesting beard the guy on the left has? And can you see where he's parted his hair on the right side almost down to his ear? We also have an illustration now of what we think of as longer neck ties, and if you look at the drawing, many of these would be loosely tied. If you think about what men's suit, when they wear a suit, what the necktie looks like now with a nice, precise, tight, what's called a four-in-hand or a Windsor knot to them, these were much looser. And if you look at the second row, there's also a longer necktie style that was popular, which was pretty much like two wide-ish tabs that you would just fold one over the other and use a stick pin or a tie pin to keep them together. And this is also a popular style. Now, if you look at the photograph of the gentleman on the left, that's a good example of a guy who doesn't have a necktie at all. Nope. He has a little bit of a collar, but he's not wearing a necktie. That is not fashionable for anybody of any kind of renown, but you will see it on people of lower means. And here's a few examples. If you go from left to right that we're going through time, the guy on the left has an early four-in-hand necktie from really early 1870s. The guy in the middle is from 1880s, and the gentleman on the right with the wingtip collar is from late 1890s. And you can see how the four-in-hand necktie, the knot and the width and the neatness of it is evolving. Also notice the shirt collars. Each one of those are different. They're the same kind of thing. It almost looks like an early two-point collar that's bending down. The man with the great big side whiskers, his looks like he doesn't even have his shirt collar buttoned. And you can see the next gentleman, you can see the little bit of action on the shirt collar. And the guy in the last photograph, it's very very familiar to us as like a very formal wingtip collar on his outfit. So what did the gentlemen wear in the evening? Well, tailcoats are still around, and the tails are knee length. And by the 1880s, we've got an option of having not just notched collar tailcoats, but also ones with a shawl collar or a rounded, curved one that doesn't have a notch in it. Those are available after the 1880s. But the new thing is a tuxedo coming into popularity as more of an informal, formal coat. And it's named tuxedo because it was first seen at a formal gathering at a Tuxedo Park Country Club in New York State. And it was very, very new and trendy. And some people thought it was disrespectful, and some people thought it was great because it's more comfortable. It's basically the sack jacket version of a formal coat. So it looks like a sack coat, but it's made out of better fabric and it's tailored well, and it became acceptable to wear to formal occasions after the 1880s. Now, there's a discrepancy in there's a lot of stuff you can study as far as formal wear for men goes, but a general rule of thumb is that in this time period, it was called a tuxedo in the United States, but it was referred to as a dinner jacket in England, but it would still be dark. When we get into the turn of the next century, especially when we get into the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, there's going to be a change in the dinner jacket, and a dinner jacket is going to be white. So in this time period, late Victorian, a dinner jacket is the British version of a tuxedo. Let's look at some. Okay, tailcoats first. Same thing we've seen before. Step back or cut away, and then long tails in the back. And we've got a front and back view on the right side, and you can see how there's still some pleats back there. They may get a little bit shorter as we go through time. We still have a notched collar. These are worn open, and you can see much more of the shirt front, as the formal vest underneath is much more low cut than the daytime vest. And oftentimes the formal shirt would have a stiff, removable front that they would button on, and they referred to those as boiled fronts because in order to get the really heavy-duty starch, they would boil the starch, put the shirt fronts in, get them saturated, spread out the starch, and then iron them. Then you actually, they were stiff as a board. So oftentimes you'll see that. This is a lovely painting by a French painter called the Soirée, and this is during the Bustle time period, and you can't really see a lot of detail, but here's what I like about this. Not only are the women's gowns lovely, they're all seated, you can't really see a lot of it, but you can see all the gents, and they are in white tie and tails. You've all heard that before, and I think I mentioned this in class, but just in case you didn't catch it. When we talk about white tie and tails, basically what that means is that is the most formal kind of evening wear you can have. And these gentlemen are wearing a white formal shirt, a white bow tie, and black tails. And they would also, most likely when they'll be dancing, be wearing white gloves as well. Oh yes, and here's two more illustrations of gentlemen dancing at very formal parties with very lovely ladies in evening gowns. And you can see the men are wearing white gloves because you would never want to soil a lady's beautiful silk dress with a sweaty palm. And then here's our tuxedo or dinner jacket, as this was a British book this came out of. And tuxedo jackets could have a shawl collar like this one does from the 1890s. Or they could have notched jackets as well. But this was considered formal wear, just not as formal as wearing a tailcoat. And it becomes more and more acceptable as time goes on. So the vests for evening wear or waistcoats are usually double-breasted, but not always. Unless if you're doing white tie and tails, you'd have a white vest. Otherwise, if it wasn't that formal of an occasion, your vest might match your jacket. With a tuxedo, it usually would. At this time period, the shirts were white. We talked about that. Have a starched front. collars and studs down the front, bow ties. The trousers for formal wear were narrower. They were black, or they matched the color of the coat, and had though that wonderful formal wear braid down the out seam of the pants. Okay, what do they wear for warmth outdoors? Well, we have got lots of choices, and you could study this probably for a doctoral dissertation, which we are not going to do. What I want you to know is there are a lot of different styles of men's overcoats, and the length is going to vary. They're rather short in the 1870s. By the time we get to the 1890s, you'll see overcoats that are longer in length. We have the Chesterfield, which we had before, which has a velvet part of the collar. We have a top coat that looks like a frock coat. It's just longer and goes over everything. There's the Inverness cape that we had in the last period that is like what Sherlock Holmes wore. There's the Ulster, which is a very long overcoat. That's one of its identifying characteristics. It has a fabric belt that goes with it, and it often had a hood or a cape. But there are other variations on these, and there are overcoats that have little cape-like collars attached, and there's lots and lots of these. And if you do research, you'll see lots of variations. These are the, there's lots of variations on the theme. Here's the Inverness cape style, which was a coat with an attached cape around the shoulders, and it could be in different variations. The one on this plaid on the left looks like it's got a full little cape attached to the coat that matches. The guy on the right, it doesn't come all the way around the body. It just is more like over the shoulders, and it's attached in the back inside a princess line seam. So there were variations on this kind of a theme of a coat with a cape attached. Here's an Ulster. And this is a plaid one that doesn't have a belt that goes all the way around. It just has a belt-like thing in the back. And if you've ever seen those on overcoats today, that little rectangular piece that is buttoned onto a coat, they've come from belts that used to be attached to coats, and now they're just a design feature. This Ulster also happens to have a little shoulder capey thing. So, there you go. Here's a top coat that has some fur. And here are some more illustrations. Okay, the picture on the left is from the 1870s, and you can see that the one on the left, that's just a regular top coat, is rather short. And the Chesterfield with the velvety upper collar on the right is a little bit longer. And then there's a formal overcoat that the gentleman on the right is wearing with his tuxedo outfit. And his has a little capey thing attached. Variations on a theme. What did men's hair look like during this 30 years? Well, it's relatively short, not short like today where, the backs are really, really short, but they were relatively short. But the thing in the Victorian period, especially this part of it, is facial hair was in. Lots of mustaches. And when you'd see mustaches, you might have mustaches with side whiskers, are also called sideburns, and a beard, or just a mustache by itself, and lots of variations on those mustaches. So, okay, let's just take a gander here of a bunch of different pictures of men's hair and facial hair. The hair itself is not that long, usually a side or a center part. There's a lot of use of different kinds of hair tonics and pomades and stuff, but still there's a lot of pictures where guys' hair looks like crap. It looks dirty and greasy and fly by night and or not. We've got a variation in mustaches here. Sometimes, and you can see the military guy in the top left corner, they're outrageously, ridiculously long. But this is a period of really cool mustaches. Here's some more. And we even see some beards here. And the side whiskers. If you can see the man with the really bizarre sideburns, the picture that's pretty pixelated, those were referred to as Dundrearies. The really bushy ones that come all the way around and they almost are a beard, but your chin is bare. Those are named after a character in an early American play called Our American Cousin. You may have studied this in theater history, but there was a character named Mr. Dundreary, and he was originally played to have these huge side whiskers, and so they started calling him that. So you'll see variations of sideburns. You'll see variations of beards from really long and or very short and nicely kept. The gentleman in this collage with the top hat and the cigar, that's the Prince of Wales. That's Queen Victoria's son, and he was quite dashing with a beard, but it was nicely trimmed. Not everybody's was. Okay, hats. We have what we had before and then a few more styles. Top hats are still super popular, not just for evening wear, but for formal afternoon wear. We've got bowlers or derbies, right? Derby, we call it in the United States. A bowler is like the British term for a round crowned hat. Fedoras are soft felt hats that have a crease in. You know what a fedora is. Those are going to change through time period, and the thing that is the most identifying about a fedora is that it's got a soft brim that you can bend in different directions. The width of the brim will change throughout history. The height of the crown will change, that kind of stuff, but it's soft and has a crease in the crown. And then a variation of that is a Homburg hat, which Prince Albert is going to make popular. And it's stiffer. It's almost like you take a fedora and you make the brim curve up very uniformly all the way around. Um, there were also soft caps for sports, and think of newsy caps, things like that. There were boater hats that are straw, square-looking hats that had been shellacked really hard. They're straw hats. These were worn for specifically things that had to do with the water most of the time. There was a deerstalker cap that's a soft cap that was also referred to as the fore and aft cap because it has a bill in the front and a bill in the back, and this is the cap that Sherlock Holmes wears. And a lot of these soft things were made out of really colorful wool, tweed, plaid, check, things like that. So here is what I mean by a derby or a bowler. And the crown could be different heights, and that's one thing that changes as we go through time. There are some times where a really tall crowned derby is popular, and some when a lower crowned derby is popular. The Prince of Wales, there he is in his beautiful silk top hat in 1875. And here's two other gentlemen in top hats from different time periods, and these are even taller. But the shape of the of top a top hat isn't just a top hat. I mean, if you think of the difference between Abraham Lincoln's stovepipe top hat and things like this, I mean, there's a difference. Sometimes the crowns bell out a little bit. Sometimes they're just totally straight. Sometimes the brim goes up. If you can see the guy who's in semi-profile to us on the left, you can see how the brim is curved, but it kind of goes up on the sides, and the guy on the right, not so much. And the hat bands change and all that kind of jazz. So, top hats. And then here's a few pictures of different ones. There's a boater or the straw hat. The Homburg, there's a couple of examples of what I mean by the curved brim Homburgs, a little stiffer. The deerstalker cap has a brim in the front and the back, and then on the bottom left corner, and just kind of a example of a soft cloth cap. But here, I thought this was interesting. This is some 1890s mug shots of a gang in Birmingham, England, and all of them have these soft caps on, and you think of these as newsy caps. Well, they also were worn by some criminals, so there you go. What did they wear on their feet? Well, patent leather, shiny leather is actually popular a lot for the day and the evening. But the shoes are going to lace up. Their Oxford style is probably the most popular style. Either they lace up or they button up. If you've heard of Victorian button-up shoes, that was around too. There were some that were elastic sided because we know we've got rubber by this time period, and when you have rubber you can start to make elastic, and they would put an elastic wedge on either side of the shoe so that a foot could get slipped into it. Higher shoes for hunting, or if you were a worker, you would wear like in the costume shop. Those of you who work in the costume shop probably know what I mean by Stacy Adam high tops. Leather shoes that had higher ankles. They didn't just end at the ankle, they came up the leg a little bit. We have sports shoes that have rubber soles. We actually have the early version of a sneaker come out during this time period, canvas with a rubber sole for sports things. I want you to learn the term Oxford because that is what a tie-up shoe is called, and that just a regular tie-up, low ankled regular dress shoe is an Oxford, and that's the most popular style during this time period. Accessories, well, we've got gloves, different kinds of gloves for different times of day. Walking sticks are really popular for upper class guys. We've got neckties now, and they're long, so we need something to keep them from flapping out. So we're going to have tie pins or tie studs, watches, and I don't mean wrist watches. I mean pocket watches with chains or fobs are very important. Shirt studs to fasten the shirt, because often shirts did not have buttons like we know today. They would have two sets of buttonholes, and you would fold one side over the other and put a shirt stud through it so you could change the look and have different kinds of studs. Cufflinks, because we've got cuffs that are more French styled most often, and men would wear cufflinks. But it wasn't considered cool for a guy to wear jewelry. If you had fancy cufflinks and a nice watch chain, that's one thing. But as far as lots of rings or, stuff, not so much. So here is a portrait from the Bustle period that I think is lovely. And it shows a gentleman holding an umbrella for a lady in a bustle dress walking down the street in Paris, and he has got a frock coat on. He's got a vest. He's got light colored pants and a bow tie and a beautiful top hat.